Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Owens, and I'm the director of the risk control team at HAI Group. Thank you for joining us for our session and panel discussion, A Business Continuity Plan in Action. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be made available to registered attendees, along with other session materials following the conference. The information presented today is for educational purposes only and should not be considered legal or professional advice. Each organization should consult its own experts when implementing policies or procedures related to the topics discussed. If you do have any questions during the session, please submit them in the Q&A panel. We'll address as many as possible during the live discussion. To start this session, we have Melanie Herman, Esquire, that will present a high-level overview of the purpose, value, and essential aspects of a business continuity plan. Melanie has served as executive director of the Nonprofit Risk Management Center since 1996 and has held senior management positions in the nonprofit sector since 1987. She is the principal author of more than 20 books on risk management topics, including her latest, Possibilities, a Risk Management Guide for Nonprofit Teams, which was just published in September 2025. She is also a 15-time member of the Nonprofit Times Powerful and Influence Top 50, which I thought was amazing. Congratulations on that achievement. After Melanie's presentation, we will be conducting a panel session where we will continue our business continuity discussion with Melanie, Vince Pearson of the Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency in California, and Troy LePage of HAI Group. Now I'll hand it over to Melanie to begin the session.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Beth. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I'll just say a couple words about the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. We were actually created 33 years ago to be a resource, a nonprofit organization that helps other nonprofit and public sector teams really embrace risk taking by managing risk effectively. So we're believers that if you manage risks well, your agency can lean into risk and maybe take more risks than you would otherwise be able to. So that's kind of what we do. And you can see that our website is nonprofitrisk.org. So let's start by talking about what is business continuity planning. So it's a term that we often use and is perhaps used differently by leaders across different agencies. But when I think about business continuity planning, I'm really focused on a process that helps us keep those absolutely necessary functions running during a time when our normal operations are interrupted or disrupted, right? So a business continuity planning process helps us ensure that those functions, activities, tasks that are vital, that must continue no matter what, can continue during a period of disruption. And a strong BCP will also explain how other functions that had to be paused or kind of put aside for a period of time will be resumed or brought back online in an efficient way. So that's what business continuity planning is all about. I think business continuity planning has always been important for any agency that has a vital mission that is serving a community, serving people, and where you have vital functions and activities. But it's especially important because I think most of us have come to recognize that interruptions to how we do business, the ways we do business, and typical operations are bound to happen, right? They don't just happen to agencies that are unlucky. They don't just happen to agencies that are located in certain parts of the country, right? They don't just happen to certain types of organizations. They happen to all of us. They happen to all of us. And while it's pretty impossible to anticipate and imagine every type of disruption that might occur, I think what we can do as leaders of organizations is to try to plan for impacts, right? So I'm going to talk about this a little bit more throughout this first segment, and also I'm sure in the panel discussion. I'm kind of obsessed about planning for impacts over planning for very specific, kind of narrowly construed events. When you plan for impacts, think about impacts on your staffing, think about impacts on your facilities and service delivery, right? If you plan for impacts, you're almost ready for any type of interruption, right? Any disruption that might occur. And so I think if you have limited time and resources, which most of us do, I think planning for impacts is the way to go. So we'll talk more about that, but I think it's especially vital because none of us have that crystal ball. None of us have that ability to forecast the future and know exactly the types of disruptions we're going to face, the magnitude of those disruptions, and probably most importantly, when those disruptions or interruptions to normal will actually occur. So there are a couple of additional benefits of engaging in business continuity planning and doing the hard work of creating a business continuity plan. The first one is I think if you put the plan together in the way that we're going to talk about today and you do the hard work associated with creating a plan, you're going to gain some new insights into the dependencies of different functions and activities within your organization. You'll start to see how something happening in one function or department is impacted or potentially impacted by the work of another department or dependent on the work of others across the agency. The other thing that I think you gain when you engage in business continuity planning and you actually do that hard work of creating a plan is I think you wind up with an opportunity to really think about the role and the cost effectiveness and the positioning of key tasks, of important functions and activities in your agency. You kind of see them in a different light or you see them through a different lens. And ultimately, I think that could be really helpful. If your organization is like mine, we are just on almost, it feels like autopilot sometimes, just doing the things we've always done, right? Continuing the work, serving people, addressing issues that crop up. We rarely give ourselves the space to just pause and ask the kinds of questions that you should be asking as you're creating a business continuity plan. So, business continuity planning, this exercise that we want you to engage in, helps you figure out which are the activities that must be continued or sustained without interruption. What are those things? And often it's a small list of things, activities, functions, and tasks that cannot be stopped no matter what. So, despite the interruption, despite things happening around you that you don't control, right? These activities must be sustained no matter what. It also helps you identify those activities that can be interrupted, right, or paused, and you can determine in advance for how long that pause can occur. And it also helps you maintain those time sensitive operations in the immediate wake of that disruption. So let's talk a little bit about what makes a BCP plan or a business continuity plan effective and accountable, right? Effective and accountable and actionable. Use the word on the slide. So I've chosen three words to really draw our attention to how to make a business continuity plan practical and actionable. So the first is relevant, right? The plan has to be relevant to your agency. And it also has to distinguish between those vital operations versus important operations. And you'll see in the business impact analysis worksheet that I'm going to show you, and we'll talk about further, that we've chosen words very carefully. So vital refers to those operations, functions, or activities that cannot be taken offline. Important refers to functions and activities that are worth doing, but they can be paused for some period of time. So you'll see that range of labels and references and what all of that means. But just keep in mind that it's so important that we distinguish between things that must continue no matter what and other activities, while still important to our mission and still important to our communities, are important, but not necessarily vital. So another aspect that makes a business continuity plan actionable is it has to be resourceful. It should be somewhere you go to get those clear directions, those next steps, maybe the first three things you're going to do when that disruption occurs. But hopefully it will also include points of contact that you'll need when normal operations are disrupted. And I would imagine that all of us have been through this in our personal lives and in our professional lives as well. A situation where something was offline, something wasn't available, and we were trying to track somebody down and we couldn't remember either the company they worked for, their phone number, their email address. We didn't know how to reach them because we couldn't get to our normal communications channels. So a great BCP is resourceful because it points you in the direction of those essential points of contact, and it should really cover everything you might need during an interruption or a disruption to normal operations. And then the next quality that I think is essential, and I think this is where sometimes we get ahead of ourselves, and maybe this is where the biggest mistake happens in drafting a BCP. A BCP should be clear. So whatever plan you come up with, whether it's just a handful of pages, whether it's a dozen or more pages long, whether it's a series of charts, whether it's a narrative, whether it's a giant spreadsheet, whatever format you wind up using to create your business continuity plan, it needs to be clear. And the reason, well, a couple of reasons. One is that clear instructions are always easier to follow. Each of us would much prefer to have a clear set of instructions than kind of a maze that we have to work our way through. So that's an important reason. But the second thing is that during a period of disruption or interruption, things are moving so fast and there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of pressure coming at you from different directions. If you don't have a clear set of instructions, you're more likely to stumble. You're more likely to miss something. You're more likely to take those steps out of order. So step-by-step processes or guidance is absolutely essential in a well-written, practical, actionable business continuity plan. I also think that a very simple table of contents is helpful so that on page 2 or page 1 of your plan, you can clearly see what's included and what's not included. So for example, if your business continuity plan includes a section on crisis communications or crisis management, you reference that in the table of contents, but if it doesn't, you'll know right away that that information must be found somewhere else. All right, Beth asked me to talk a little bit about some of the common challenges in creating a business continuity plan. And the first one for me that comes to mind is skipping probably the most important but difficult step of the entire process. So, the most important but difficult step of the entire planning process is what's called a business impact analysis. And this is where groups often stop working on the plan, right? They get started and then they see the work that's involved in business impact analysis, and that's where they're kind of put off and find it difficult. So we've created a worksheet that I think you'll find really useful. There's also an HI group worksheet as well. A business impact analysis looks at each function or program in the same light by asking this question: how long can we not do this without causing significant impacts? And those impacts could be financial impacts, client related impacts, um, impacts related to regulations and funding sources and so forth. So it's the same question for each activity or function or task. How long can we not do this without causing significant impacts? And you need to run through a long list of functions and activities and ask that same question. And you'll see on the worksheet, then you can kind of code each activity or function or task, either vital at one end of the spectrum, important at the other end of the spectrum, or somewhere in between. So some of the great questions you should be asking when you're doing that difficult work of business impact analysis include things like, what are the key processes or tasks and functions that are part of each major team or department within our agency, right? And I already mentioned that question of how long could each process or task be offline before we have serious impacts. Which functions can be done manually if an automated process is interrupted? Of course, this happens all the time. This is an interruption we should plan for. What are the types of equipment and supplies that we might need? And then what are the key vendors and suppliers who could help us, who could step in, who could support us, or should be just notified if a function or activity or process is interrupted? A few additional questions and considerations, and these are, again, with respect to functions, programs, and services. What are the costs of not delivering this service? What about the costs of being late, right? What's the longest a service could remain undelivered? And again, what must be sustained at all costs and what can be put on hold? A lot of questions, and it's really up to you to figure out the answers rather for your agency. And I think sometimes we wonder if there isn't a business continuity plan created by one organization that we could just all use. And the short answer is no. No, because each agency, although you may have adjacent and overlapping missions, each agency is different, has different circumstances, constraints, resources, obviously locations, and so forth. So, the second common mistake in creating a business continuity plan is not involving people who really understand the important issues at the very beginning. So often what happens is it's time to create a BCP and somebody draws the short straw. And that one person is asked to go ahead and create that plan on their own, or perhaps just with a colleague in their own department. But few of us have that full view of the entire agency and really understand the details that are needed to create a practical and actionable BCP that we need. So find out, who has firsthand knowledge of important details related to those vital operations, those activities, functions, and tasks that must be continued no matter what. Where is that information written down? Are there backups? And whose perspective might be missing? At each stage of drafting a business continuity plan, I want you to remember to ask yourself, whose perspective is missing, right? Who might have a different perspective on this very issue or this section of the plan? It's such a great question prompt because it reminds us that, our agencies depend on lots of people to be successful, and each of us has our own set of insights and knowledge and experiences we can bring to the table for during the creation of a BCP. All right, number three, this is a huge mistake, but a lot of organizations make this mistake. They create the BCP, they have a great plan in place, it's very clear, it's well written, it has those resources documented, but then that BCP is hidden. It's kept under wraps, right? It's password protected and it's stored somewhere where only a couple of people have access. And so I want you to ask this important question as you create your BCP or you update your BCP, revise your BCP. I want you to ask, who might need to refer to this during a disruption of any type, right? A disruption from any source, a disruption with any cause. Who might need to actually use this plan, right? And find information in the plan. And I also want you to ask, who would be less worried if they understood the plan, right? If they had access to the plan. This is something that often happens in organizations that are doing a good job with risk management. We find that staff members are worried about things that have been taken care of, right, or anticipated by leaders, but the leadership team has failed to let everybody know that there's a plan. And the most compelling way to demonstrate that you have a plan and it's clear and it's resourceful and it's actionable is by letting people see it, right? And there should be no top secret information in your business continuity plan. So I encourage you to unhide or to not hide your BCP and make sure that people know that it's available and allow them to see it, right? And I added the word everyone to this slide just to remind you that chances are during a serious interruption or disruption, almost everyone in your agency will need some piece of information found in that plan. All right, I want to talk for just a minute about a tool that we created with HEI Group a few years ago. It's called My Business Continuity Plan, and it's an interactive, free online tool, and it has been customized for you. So there's a special version of this web application that is free to HEI Group members. So we want you to check it out. This is what it looks like. So when you go to the website, you'll see My Business Continuity Plan at the top. You'll see the HEI Group logo, and you'll also see the Nonprofit Risk Management Center logo. So that tells you you're in the right place. And the way we created this was we decided to offer three different options or three pathways. The first pathway is what we call the overview. That's the short version of a BCP. We also created an intermediate pathway. And that's a great option if you have a little bit more time. And then we also created a comprehensive pathway. The comprehensive pathway has the most questions and the most blanks that you're going to need to fill in, and it will create the most detailed BCP. But we wanted to offer those other two options as well. What's nice about this web application is that if you're somebody who doesn't like to start creating a document from a blank sheet of paper, if you have that kind of fear of a blank sheet of paper that many of us do, this tool will just walk you through the steps by asking you questions, and all you have to do is either choose an answer from a drop-down box or type in your answer. So it requires work on your part. This is not like a fully automated business continuity plan creator that doesn't require any work or thinking. Such a thing doesn't really exist. This one requires some work, but it prompts you with questions and it leads you through the process, and you don't have to think about the structure, and you don't have to worry about a blank sheet of paper because you'll never see one. So that's what the tool is all about. And on this slide, I just wanted to show you that with the overview, there's one module, 6 questions. With the intermediate, you have 2 modules and 12 questions to answer. And then with the full comprehensive BCP, the tool will contain 10 modules and 65 total questions. So the option is yours. You can choose any one of these pathways, whichever you feel comfortable with, and create the plan this way. Of course, you can always create a BCP with a blank sheet of paper. And I give you lots of credit if you choose to do that. Many organizations opt for that blank sheet of paper and create something fully custom from the get-go. But if you'd like to, use this tool. It's really easy to use. It's straightforward. And again, you have those 3 pathways. There are also companion worksheets that go along with the web application. This is the BCP overview worksheet. This is really helpful if you want to kind of jot down some information before you jump into the tool and start answering the questions. So this will prompt you with the questions you're going to be asked in the tool, so you can kind of get your thoughts together in advance. This is HAI Group's version of the worksheet for BCP. So we encourage you to check this one out. This is what they call a business impact analysis questionnaire template. So this can really help you get ready to create that business continuity plan for your agency. So I think you'll find this one helpful and useful as well, and super easy to use. This is the business impact analysis worksheet that I was referring to a few minutes ago. And as you can hopefully see on this particular slide, we've listed on the left-hand side a column that says key function or activity, and you would identify those key functions or activities in your agency, and you might have dozens and dozens, right? And this worksheet is going to prompt you through the steps to identify the maximum acceptable downtime, or the MAD as it's called. If the maximum acceptable downtime is 8 hours or less, this is basically something that really cannot be offline for any period of time, then we're going to label the function vital. If the MAD is 24 hours or less, right, we're going to label it critical. If the MAD is 5 business days, up to 5 business days, then the function is essential. And if the MAD is greater than that, the function is still important, but it's not essential, critical, or vital. All right. Let me show you the next page of the worksheet. I think it will start to make sense. So this is a fillable PDF worksheet. On the left-hand side, in what you see as those kind of purple, blue boxes, you would list all your key functions or activities, and you could have many pages. And what you might do is have each department in your agency complete a business impact analysis worksheet for their department. So each department would list its key functions or activities, and then it would choose the maximum acceptable downtime from the drop-down menu. And then, of course, the largest boxes to fill in on this worksheet are: what's your recovery timeline and strategies? What will you do to get this back up and running if it has to be taken offline for some period of time? All right, so that's the business impact analysis worksheet. And this is the hardest part of business continuity planning. This is the difficult part, but it's really important. So let me pause for a minute and see if there are any questions about what I've said so far.
So, Melanie, we do have a question just regarding the tool and asking if it is on HAI's website. So there is a link on our website to the nonprofit risk management center's website where they can sign up for the tool. And it is free to any policyholders of ours.
Well, anybody
So
else have a question for me before we shift gears?
I think Melanie too, if and this is kind of putting you on on the spot a little bit, but just regarding our affiliate membership with you all, if you could just kind of explain that
Oh,
relationship and how it gives our policyholders access to your additional resources.
absolutely, absolutely. So we have an affiliate membership program, and HEI Group is a member. And what that means is any policyholder is also a member at no additional cost. So there's no cost to you to access what we call member benefits, member resources. So when you go to nonprofitrisk.org, you can create your own login to our website. And the benefit of doing that is that every time you come back to nonprofitrisk.org, you'll be behind that membership curtain and you'll see all the member resources that members of the general public will not see. And again, they're free. The two most important benefits, I think, are access to our recorded webinars. So we record 6 new webinars every year. We have a webinar vault of 250 recorded programs on almost every imaginable risk topic, all free. Most of them are 30 minutes long. Very straightforward. You can download the slides, you can watch the recording at your convenience. So you have access to that full webinar vault at no cost because if you're a policyholder of HEI Group, you're also a member of the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. And then the second benefit that I think our members most appreciate is what we call risk help. And so risk help is our service where we take calls and emails from any member agency about any risk issue that crops up. Many people call us about risk issues they're thinking about, something they're working on, they want to bounce some ideas off of one of us. We're always happy to brainstorm with you and offer some risk advice, not legal advice, but risk advice. And in some cases, people call us when there's a bit of a crisis um, happening in their agency and they want to talk to somebody quickly. So there's no cost for the phone call, for the email. And often when we receive a risk help call or email, we set up a Zoom, we hop on the phone with you and we share information back and forth. In all cases, we're going to offer specific resources. We're going to show you what we have that might be helpful with a complete and total focus on sharing things that are practical. So it's a free consultative service. It's called Risk Help. There's a form on our website you can use. You could fill that out if you'd like to, but you don't have to. You can just email me directly or send an email to info@nonprofitrisk.org and have that confidential one-on-one conversation with me or a member of my team to help you work through whatever risk issue you're working on. So Risk Help and then access to that webinar vault, I think are the two most valued benefits of membership, but we have other benefits too. We have discounts on our conferences and books and other resources.
Perfect. Thank you so much for explaining that. We do also have one question. What are the three biggest threats to housing operations to plan on adding to BCP?
Okay, let me just make sure I understand it. What are the three biggest threats to?
Housing operations. And I think we are going to kind of speak about this during the panel session.
Sure, sure.
Um, but if you want to fill in a little,
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that I think it's so important to try to kind of shift our thinking to impacts versus threats, right? Because two different threats or events or types of disruptions could have a similar impact on the agency. When I think about a housing organization, I think being able to provide right safe housing for the people who live in your properties, that would be top of mind. Being able to provide the staff support that would be needed, right? So I think about impacts on staff and I think about impacts on residents. So those are the two categories of impacts that I would be most concerned about. But a third might be financial sustainability and obviously being able to pay the bills and generate the revenue you need to operate in a healthy, financially secure way. But when I focus on impacts rather than specific events, if you think about a hurricane, if you think about a cyber attack, you think about a tornado, you think about all these different events, they all come down to or draw us back to the idea that our staff are going to be impacted, our residents are going to be impacted, and our financial security could be impacted. So again, I go back to thinking about impacts because I think that we wind up with a much shorter list than if we start with a list of events, of disasters, of potential catastrophes.
Definitely agree. I think this is a great time for us to bring in the rest of the panelists. They could, well, we have Troy LePage of HAI Group and Vince Pearson of Sacramento. And if we could, please, Troy, if you wouldn't mind just doing a brief introduction.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Troy LePage. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President here at HAI Group. And in my 8 years spent here, I've overseen a lot of our BCP planning as an organization, as well as oversight over our ERM functions as well.
Thank you. And Vince?
Sure. And thank you for this opportunity today. I'm Vince Pearson with Sacramento Housing Redevelopment Agency. I'm the risk manager here at the agency. Been here for about 20 years and handling all the risk operation, insurance and risk operations for our agency. And the business continuity plan obviously is a big piece of that operation as well. So glad to join everybody today.
Perfect. Thank you all for joining us. We did want to get to know our audience a little bit, so we will be posting some polling questions throughout the presentation. So we do have two questions to start off with. So if we could get that first one up there for you all. At what stage are you in your BCP journey? We're very interested to see where you guys are all at. Just to get an idea of what areas we need to focus on for the rest of the discussion. I think, Vince, while they're going through that, maybe if you could give us an indication of kind of where you are currently at with Sacramento in your BCP journey, if you
Sure.
will.
Okay, sure. And just a quick little background, because I know agencies are different sizes and everything. So again, with Sacramento Housing Redevelopment Agency, so we're our housing and obviously redevelopment. So that's another leg of our operations here. We have operations in both the city and the county, so it's a vast operation that we deal with from that standpoint, from properties in both areas, which basically makes us the largest landlord here in the Sacramento region, and probably for many of you out there too. When you think about it, you might be the largest landlord in your area out there. We've also been tasked to handle the unhoused and homeless population out here, and if y'all been keeping up with the news, that's a big issue out here in California. It's a big issue here in Sacramento. And so that piece falls up under our jurisdiction as well, which in itself brings another level of risk to our agency. But in regards, and some of the risks that because of that, the number one thing, and Melanie alluded to this too, I think her presentation, I mean, really with us with housing is the habitational piece. We have our employees, we have our financial issues, our IT, but certainly the habitational pieces, just because of who we are, is a big concern. If there's one thing I tell people that I would never want to get a call at night, that one of our high rises is on fire, because that would be a truly big disaster and certainly a disruption of operation. So fire is one of our concerns that we have out here since coming out of COVID. Mold, water intrusion is brought additional risks now that we're handling here, and concerns of whole properties having to be closed down because of mold or water intrusion matters. Acts of violence certainly can bring an aspect
Mhm.
from the standpoint of any disruption we may have in power outages, which are really true in our day and age now with the power grid, and we've experienced that several times out here in California in regards to power outages in our property. So with all that said, all of the above is an aspect of bringing some type of disruption to our operations. In regards to our business continuity journey, full disclosure, we started this program kind of pre-COVID. It's still a little piecemeal together and just have sections of it, but we do have pieces of it together. But with that said, started on that post-COVID, we did see some improvements we can make to it. We were able to streamline our program due to COVID. I know later on in this presentation, we'll talk a little bit about the pre-COVID and post-COVID scenario of the business continuity plan. But we learned some lessons for that. At that time, we had an outside outfit called Agility Recovery. They were set up off site. So if we had any type of major business interruption, this is primarily for our administration building or our staff, they were housed off site across the river from where we are, where there were physical, modular units where we would have moved to. We would have had set workstations ready to go. We would have had equipment ready to go. So we had all that in place as part of our business plan prior to COVID. Coming
I
out of
think
COVID,
I think Vince, we're gonna probably have you expand on that section in
okay,
a little bit
okay,
when we get to a few of those questions
okay.
later. But I just wanted to did mention that it looks like you are in good company here because we do have the results of the planning question that we had here. So we have 46% of you haven't started a business continuity plan yet. 25% are in an early planning phase. 10% have a draft plan, and 10% have a finalized plan but haven't tested it. And 9% have a tested and regularly updated plan, which is great. Um, Love that you guys are on. Hopefully, you'll have some words of wisdom that you can put in the chat for your fellow peers that are on the call. We do have a second question that we are going to just bring up with you regarding how confident are you that your housing authority could maintain critical operations during a major disruption? So we have a few choices up there for you. Let's see, get you all in there.
Beth, it was great to see the humility in the answers to the last question. I love that. You can't address something, work on something, make something better if you're not willing to admit we haven't gotten very far. So
Right, right, right.
so
Definitely. And that wasn't very surprising to us because when we do go out on site, we do ask, where do you have your business continuity plan? When was the last time it was updated? So that I wasn't very surprised with those answers, but appreciate everyone's honesty on that.
Exactly. It still remains an elephant in the room in many, many operations, not just housing, but many operations. Yeah.
And we've received the results for this one, so thank you all for answering. We have 58% are somewhat confident, 23% with very confident. I love that. Love the confidence on that one. 15% not confident, and 4% are unsure. I think the unsure portion probably comes from the lack of testing your plan, or that you haven't had to use it, which is a very positive thing at least. Troy, if you could bring up just kind of where HAI Group is at with their business continuity journey.
Sure. Thanks, Beth. I think we're in a little bit of a unique position being an insurance company. I think one of the barriers to entry for starting a BCP plan is it's very easy to say this won't happen to us, but we see those things happen on a daily basis just in the line of business that we're in. So I think we have a relatively mature plan. We like to learn from some of the events that we hear about, that we see. But that said, it's never to the point where you can kind of just put it in a drawer and forget about it. I think the world is constantly changing. We're going to talk a little bit about technology later. And while technology is an enabler, it's also changed our plan, and it's added some complexity that is important to consider. Just earlier last week in the news, many of you probably saw a lot of the cloud network from AWS was down, and that impacted a number of services. And while you may not have been directly impacted, I think as a country, we're largely dependent on some of these cloud-based services, whether you know it or not. And I think identification of that and focusing on who has what has been something that we've learned of late. But we have a relatively mature process. We do test with some regularity. I know we're going to talk more about that later. So,
Perfect. Thank you. Vince, if you could, how do you balance preparing for the most likely risks versus planning for the most severe but less likely scenarios? And I think that kind of stems back to Melanie's discussion around impacts. But if you could just explain how Sacramento's handling that currently.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to mention what in Melody's report. So in the plan that we're using, which I think was provided by HI, Beth, the risk analysis matrix, which is part of that, and hopefully everybody who's a part of this conversation will have a chance to go look at that. That's what we use as well, by putting a matrix together to determine the most likelihood of something happening and the consequence from that likelihood of something happening. So you put that matrix together, you come out with a score, most likely to happen, medium aspect of it, or high aspect. So with that determined, we kind of focus more on that particular area with that. And with that said, that matrix for us identified really fire, because the most likely scenario happened was fire related to our properties and buildings. And I hear also wildfire smoke, even though we're not in a heavily forested area. When we do have these significant wildfires out here, we do get a tremendous amount of smoke into the area. And we've had to close our operations down several times. So to answer your question, that matrix that is provided in the plan, if everybody uses that, they'll be able to identify the area which I think to focus on directly.
Perfect. Thank you. Melanie, if you could, how can organizations with limited time, staff, or funding still develop an effective continuity plan, and what practical advice would you offer to them?
I love this question, Beth, because I'm like obsessed about practicality and limited time and resources. Honestly, I want to go back to that idea of really trying to identify and focus on the impacts, right? So, inability to house people in one or more locations, right? The inability of staff to provide services or, continue certain functions. When you focus on impacts, you'll find that one impact could be true in all types of disruptions or disasters. So if I had a limited amount of time, I would think about what would be the most significant impact related to our residents and our housing operations. And I would think it would be a large number of people cannot live in their units for a period of time, and it could be due to fire, as Vince said, but it could be due to something else, right? It could be the power grid goes down and there's no electricity, there's no power to a particular building or a group of buildings. So I think by just picking those impacts on residents, properties, buildings, right, and impacts on staff, that's where I would spend my time. And I think that what you come up with, the backup plans, if a facility is not available, if there is disruption to residents, if staff aren't able to do the work that they normally do, the strategies you come up with will apply almost across the board. The other thing I just want to say about likelihood, in risk management, since the beginning of this discipline, we've talked about likelihood and severity. And I just want to caution everybody that I think of those two measures, the most important one is really severity. Because what we learned during COVID was that risks that are deemed of a very low likelihood, and I had one client I was working with that identified a global health pandemic in their business continuity plan. It was one of 25 disruptions they had identified. But when I flipped to the page where the plan should have been, it was blank. And it was blank because that particular risk was scored so low in terms of likelihood, they focused all their energy on the risks that were deemed to be of higher likelihood. So for me, the most important of those two measures is severity, is impact, is magnitude, whatever term you wish to use. And I would always want to be prepared for the most disruptive events even those that are highly unlikely. So just a few thoughts on those two topics.
And I love
Thank you.
framing it that way. That's a big part of what we've tried to accomplish just over the last kind of 10 years is what are you without? And I think it starts with what do you need to run your business? And you brought up kind of the amount of time we do kind of day one, day two, and then day 3 to 5. But I don't think you can lose sight of the cause either or what that event was, because some of those things look different, right? If there's a fire at your physical property and your network, your computers, those things are gone, the response to that is different than something during COVID, where you were without the ability to be together, but you weren't necessarily without your technology and some of those other things. So there are permutations that I think is important to be considerate of, to be aware of, to think about what am I without and for how long as you get to that level of maturity where it's not just the thing happened, it's what are we going to do about it? Where do we have backups? Where do we have additional IT equipment? Is it all stored in the same place? Those types of thought processes as well kind of goes one level deeper. But I agree with starting with what am I without and what do I need?
Right.
Just a question for Vince. Who within Sacramento was involved in developing your BCP, and how do you ensure that input from across departments and leadership levels?
So within our agency, and a good point I think to add this is certainly give your staff or whatever in your agency a heads up that you want to start working on a plan like this because it does take time. Melanie alluded to this too, and I liked it, is that I set up each department as their own individual business continuity plan. So the heads of those departments, I said, this is your responsibility to help determine the plan specific for your department. So I did get a buy-in from our executive director. She was on board. We met with our leadership team here and met with them. We got them all in the room and let them know this was a plan moving forward. And this again was pre-COVID. And I also gave them a list, or not too big of a list, but say, hey, I need you to identify 3 items which are critical functions that if we had any type of disruption, uh, what are the 3 critical things that we need to have up? And have we already alluded to that you cannot be without for 24 hours, one day, 7 days, whatever that may be. And so I spread the wealth throughout the agency. We are a good sized agency. I spread the wealth and put the onus back on some of our department heads. Yeah. But gave them the direction on how to do that.
Perfect. And I love how you got the buy-in of your executive director first. And I just wanted to toss a question over to Troy. From a COO's perspective, what's the most persuasive case staff can make to secure funding or executive support for a BCP initiative?
Yeah, I think using real world examples, right? You all have incredibly important missions, and having a BCP plan is something that enables you to carry out those missions in the long term. And being able to make that case that a BCP plan isn't just this compliance exercise. It's not just this thing we have to do to make somebody else happy. It's something that we need to do to make sure that we're carrying out that mission to put roofs over people's heads, to support whatever it is that your organization is doing. I think it's more expensive not to invest in a BCP plan than to have an event where it's just chaotic and you don't have leadership and you don't have organization. A lot of times those things can be really damaging to your reputation, and reputation can be priceless, especially in the industries that we serve. So, I think if you lead with those things, I get it, resources are thin, but it needs to rise to the top of some priority. I agree with a lot of what's been talked about in terms of ownership. It really can't be one person. As you look to identify what are those things I can't do without, you'd be much more successful in doing that by gathering the opinions of those who do it day to day, right? Things change. We have different approaches to different tasks. We may use different vendors. It's really hard for it to be something you do once a year. So for me, it's preaching that culture of BCP and integrating it into all that you do, as opposed to it's this spend of we do or we don't. For me, it's got to be part of your culture and a little bit more ingrained.
Perfect. Thank you. We do have a question in the chat, and I think I'll toss this over to Melanie, and if anyone else would like to chime in. Is BCP the same as an emergency operation plan or emergency preparedness plan? And I know we get questions around this fairly frequently.
Right, right. That's a great question. And the answer to all risk questions, the answer to all legal questions is actually the same. It depends, or it might be, right? So you get to decide your business continuity plan should be relevant for your agency. And if you want to include emergency operations, crisis management, crisis communications, that's up to you. I will caution you that when you start to include all these other pieces, the plan goes from 5 pages to 10 to 15 to 50. And in an emergency, in a disruption, right, the most important thing is to know the first one, two, and three things to do. And Troy alluded to this, and I love that. What do we do first, second, and next? And if you're wading through 35 pages to try to find it, now maybe it's a long plan that includes everything and it's really well structured and there's a great table of contents and everything's hyperlinked and you can get to it quickly. But I would just caution you. I was talking to somebody yesterday about an employee handbook that was 168 pages. And I said, for me, expecting a new employee to read 168 pages on their first day and then sign off that they understand everything in it is unreasonable. I would start by trying to carve out things that really don't belong there, that belong somewhere else. So you get to decide whether your BCP includes all those other pieces. But if you decide to go with something super short and put those resources in another very accessible location, but in separate documents, then more power to you.
And I think it goes back to that empowerment aspect. I think in the event of an emergency or the need for business continuity, having people who know what power or authority they have in those situations is really critical. And I think communications is a big part of that, right? While one team is working on getting everything back to the way that it was, there's another team that may need to communicate externally. Who are those people? What authority do they have? Who do you want talking to the press? Who do you not want talking to the press? Which lawyers are you going to contact to speak on your behalf in potential scenarios? So to Melanie's point, some of that, if done well, gets really deep. And sometimes it's beneficial to have those as separate plans with separate empowerment, particularly on the communication side, but it can be weaved in if it's appropriate for your organization. I know housing authorities all look a little bit different, a lot of different sizes, a lot of different operations, and you have to be mindful of that. That's kind of why there's no one size fits all, as she referenced in her presentation earlier.
If I can follow up a little bit too, also our plan coming out of COVID, and Melanie, you hit upon it, is we streamline, not just us, I'm part of an association here in California, but public agency risk managers. That streamlining of the plan was really important. As you mentioned too, it's hard to go to a document that's 30 pages, 23 pages. I think, Troy alluded to, that's so deep and so involved. So you really need to highlight specifics that really cut out some of that that's really just going to be too convoluted in your plan, but make it more streamlined, more accessible, and quick to access.
Yeah, and I would add, Vince, that, it should be clear, what am I supposed to do, right? The steps that are relevant to me. And I do think that with respect to communicating with all the various groups you need to reach out to during a period of disruption, I love the divide and conquer strategy where you don't have one person who's in charge of communications to all the different audiences, right? Identify those specific audience that would need to be informed and kept up to date and divide and conquer, right? Have a team that is each responsible, or a person, two people, each responsible for communicating to one constituency. As long as those messages are consistent and they're not misaligned in some way, it's far easier than expecting, one or two people with a communications background to, contact everybody, every group. The other thing is to draft those messages in advance. That's one of the things I teach and preach about crisis management is make sure you have those core messages. You can add the details of the disruption in the moment when it happens, but if you're starting in the middle of a disruption, our agency's mission is, our commitment to safety is, right? If you're starting with those messages you could have written in advance, you're wasting a lot of time. You're losing time. So draft the core messages in advance and identify who in advance will be contacting the various constituent groups that you have, and make sure they know they are the ones, and those folks who aren't the people to communicate know that it's somebody else.
Thank you. And then, Vince, just a question for you regarding how would you recommend incorporating feedback from residents or community partners into your continuity planning process?
Good deal. Now, this was a piece we could have done a little bit better on. When we put our plan together, we did not spend a lot of time reaching out to our residents. We just decided, if we have to evacuate this building, if you're going to be out of this building for this period of time, this is what we're going to do, I guess, or need to do for our residents. I flipped my script on that a little bit now and say we need to certainly reach out to them a little bit more. We have a RAB group here, which is Resident Advisory Board. Some of you out there in the audience, I'm sure, have those within your organizations. I certainly highly encourage you to reach out to those advisory boards that you have that are part of your housing groups out there. Definitely, we're going to do that here too. That again, get specifics from them to understand. If we had to remove you from your unit for a period of time, what is important to you going someplace else, or what is important to you to make sure that you have with you when you leave. So I would definitely reach out to any advisory boards that you may have. And if not, pull your residents together in the meeting downstairs, have some pizza or something, and say, this is a big piece of our concern in our agency, your health and safety. This could happen down the road. What's important to you if we have to remove you from this property?
Thank you for that. Troy, from a leadership standpoint, how do you ensure internal coordination and decision making remain strong when the organization is under pressure?
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about empowering different people, but I do think that during a crisis, it's also important to have calm and capable leadership at the top. I think it starts there and permeates to others. If you have leadership that's frazzled and um, not handling it as well as they could, I think sometimes that's felt by others. So knowing who that point person is to coordinate those different things and to step in when some of those empowered people may have challenges and kind of getting back to the normal. I think communication becomes really critical. One of the things I was thinking about while we talked about the communication is don't forget about your employees, right? If there's something that's impacting your business, some information is better than none. I think sometimes silence can be really unnerving for folks, and being able to communicate as early and truthful as you can while you're going through some of these things that can be challenging. Those aren't always easy messages, and there may be some uncertainty. And generally, it's hard to share immature ideas. But in the event of a crisis, I think just communicate early, communicate often, and communicate calmly to the extent that you can. And I think that leadership at the top becomes really an important part of it. But that also adds to the criticality of empowering others, right? Those folks at the top are probably going to be dealing with some of those communications and identifying the fires within the fires, as a poor metaphor there, but to kind of spend their time and really prioritize. So I think the balance of the two is important.
Perfect. We have several questions regarding testing, so I think I'm going to move on to that section of our discussion. So if we could actually please bring up the poll question regarding how often your BCP is reviewed or updated. We can get some feedback from the group on that. And while everyone is answering that, we do have a question regarding recommendations of where to store your key documents or where to store your business continuity plan online. Should you have a paper copy? And I will give a shout out to one of our housing authorities. I do know that she drives around with their business continuity plan in her trunk, just in case there is an emergency. And she does need to reference it very quickly. She does have it in there. So I guess Melanie or Troy or Vince, if you guys would like to speak to kind of that issue of, if you do have it online and there is a disruption, how do you access that
I think you need it in multiple places, right? You need to have it online, but you also need to have a physical copy. And I would say the trunk and the glove compartment, although that seems pretty excessive. But no, you need to have it in multiple places because systems go down. And if everything is online and you can't, there's a disruption to the provider hosting whatever site you're using to store the materials. So it should be very accessible. And maybe you have a shorter version of it printed out that with key contacts, right? What are the first three things I'm going to do, and who are the people I'm going to call, and how do I reach them if I need to call them from even an old-fashioned landline?
Yeah, I agree. I think business continuity is all about redundancy. So identifying what type of redundancy is appropriate for you. If you have multiple site locations where you can store one at one and not at the other, I think even just thinking about communicating with employees. Well, what if you can't email everybody? Do you have a secondary form of communication to be able to reach your folks, to tell them, not to come to your physical location or whatever that communication may be? So just thinking through all those redundancies, what if, I think becomes a really important question while you work through this. So what if you can't access your business continuity plan where it's saved? How do I get it? And obviously there's a level of, you can keep going. You could store 1,000 copies. Like, that's not appropriate. You kind of have to find that line that's appropriate for your organization and where you draw it.
Yeah,
Like that,
and
that's
I did what everybody else said. You have to have multiple locations. So we do have hard copies. All the department heads of the plan that's currently in place, they do have hard copies. Literally, well, they should. I need to go back and check. Have hard copies in their desk and in their office, as well as it's available online on our drives that we have, that all of our employees have access to, even our maintenance crews. So it is available to those locations. Yeah.
And I know we're getting into testing, but as you go through the tabletops, and if you're testing appropriately, sometimes access to the document becomes slightly less important. If these people have recently tested it, they've been through it, sometimes they just know what they need to do. And I think it's still important to be able to get to it. But kind of back to my point about creating a culture around BCP, as that continues to mature, sometimes the written word becomes slightly less important. It's still important that you have it to be able to reference for that event, but sometimes empowering people and letting them know, here's what we're going to do in the event of an emergency, and then that thing happens and they just kind of go. That's an important part of it too.
Right. I love that idea of just having a few, a few steps. What are the first three things I'm going to do? Or who are the first three people I'm going to call? Really, really important. It should be almost muscle memory to be ideal. You don't even have to open up the plan because you know what those three steps are. Beth, can I talk a little bit about testing? Or you want to share the poll results first?
sure. Yeah, we'll just go through the poll
Yeah.
results pretty quickly. Just looks like almost 50% aren't sure how often it is reviewed and updated. I think that speaks to some of what we were all talking about with the multiple copies in several locations. You always want to make sure that they're updated everywhere. You don't want to have that outdated copy out there. And then we have every 2 to 3 years at 10%, annually at 16%, and only after an incident with 9%.
Yeah. So, when I think about testing a BCP, I would do it at least annually. And I think you can do a pretty simple, this is my simplest approach to a test, is to gather a diverse group of people with different backgrounds, skills, perspectives on the vital operations of your agency, bring them together around a table or a virtual table, physical table or virtual table, and run through a couple of questions, right? What could be almost an unimaginable disruption to our operations? What would that be? Okay, what are the first three things we would do? Who are the resources we would contact? Do I know that? Or where would I find that in the plan? All right, let's come up with a disruption that maybe isn't an otherworldly disruption, but it might happen every few years and impact our facilities or impact our ability to provide housing. What are the first three things I would do? Who would I need to contact? Right? So you're kind of testing the plan against some potential scenarios. And I think that if you have the right people at the table, you're going to find holes in the plan pretty quickly. Well, gosh, I know the first thing I would do, but then I wouldn't know what to do from there. All right. How could we supplement the plan and make it so that it's clear and I know exactly what to do? And I would also ask the question, does everybody who needs to know this information know it, have access to it, understand it? Is the information in the plan really accessible, meaning understandable across the agency to everybody who would need to know?
And we do have a question kind of regarding the testing, or a comment, if you will, just regarding the differences between testing a workday scenario versus a nighttime scenario or a weekend when maybe there isn't as many staff on the properties or within the office. And what do those different scenarios look like? Which I think is a great point.
Yeah, I
Right.
think it's important to think through those things.
Yeah. Kind of variations on that testing conversation or those testing prompts, right? So what if this event were to occur where suddenly multiple properties in our portfolio are not habitable, right? what if it were to happen? And then add, okay, what if this were to happen on a weekend or during a holiday weekend, right?
Right.
And many people our core staff are not available. How would we run through those first 3 steps? Who would be the point of contact and so forth?
And I think it is important to actually do some of these things. And what I mean by that is from a technological perspective, if you have offsite backups or cloud backups, make sure that you can spin those up and keep in mind what you need to have access to be able to do that. We've heard in the event of a few cyber incidents where folks had backups, but the password was on the network that they were now locked out of, right? So as you go through those things, sometimes when you're doing it, you're like, oh, well, passwords here. What if I didn't have access to that? Where else can I maintain that? Or making sure that the backup is actually appropriate. It's being done at the cadence in which you think that it's being done. Going through that testing and doing those things that may just seem like, oh, it's going to be easy. We'll just restore the backup. It's easy to say that, but I think it's important to kind of test that process and make sure that that's functioning the way that you think that it is.
We do have just a question regarding, would it be helpful to organize the BCP by department, showing how each team responds to impacts on residents, staff, and properties? For example, resident services may respond differently than financial services. Even if the full plan is lengthy, each department would only see its relevant section.
Yeah, my thought
Yeah.
is that might be helpful, but you could also then take all that great content for the various functions and departments and then say, all right, facility is unavailable or uninhabitable. Here's how finance would respond. Here's how resident services would respond. Here's how, kind of bullet underneath that impact, how each team would respond. And I think that gives everybody the fuller picture. Whereas if it's just organized by department and the department's only thinking about what it's doing, then you're almost reinforcing, I hate to say silos, but sometimes we have silos in our organizations that they get very large and people are doing things for the same benefit or the same outcome, but operating almost independently. Whereas if you can see that, wow, another team is taking care of that, so we'll focus on our piece. So I would take all that great content and inputs from the functions and departments, but I tried to pull it together so that everybody can see that it's a cohesive, coordinated response involving multiple teams across the agency.
Yeah. And I go back to what we mentioned earlier. I do think each department needs their own BCP plan, understand what they need to do, but it's overall part of the whole agency plan. I've shared that with our organization here. You need to share that with your organizations out there. You do need your own business continuity plan in your department, how you're going to operate, but you are part of the greater agency as a whole. Yeah.
One of the things I've seen be successful at some organizations too is creating a BCP committee, and you have leadership from all of the critical departments that take part in the planning, right? So then when the event happens, it's finance, you focus on how you're going to get payments out. HR, you focus on how you're going to get payroll done. And if those people have been at the table all along, it makes that a little bit easier in the event of a disaster, just because they're up to speed, they're ready to go, and it's not just this one person who created a plan unbeknownst to everyone else. Just creating again that culture and that awareness throughout the organization. And some organizations are smaller, and maybe that doesn't make sense for you, but for the larger ones, having a group at the table within your company, I think can be helpful.
And with that said, Troy, we also put together a critical employee list
Sure.
and that we have about 25 employees who are considered not all part of the leadership team, but most of the leadership team, some managers, some line level individuals who we do keep together on a list that we have in regards to there's any business continuity, but they have a pulse over the entire agency as a whole. So we do have a business continuity group, about 25 people. So that's a good point that you bring up.
Yeah, I love that. And I don't think they all need to be executives. I think it's better that they're not. So I
Right,
agree with your
right.
point.
Being just kind of in a little bit of a different direction, Troy, how do you see AI influencing the future of business continuity planning, and what risks should organizations consider when using it?
I would group AI with a lot of the changing technology that we've kind of talked about throughout. I think could you go to a chat GPT or something and ask it to help you write a BCP plan? Absolutely, obviously be careful what you're uploading to that, but I think that there's a lot of help with that. I think that one of the benefits of AI is something that helps you think about the things that you haven't if you were to use the tool that Melanie and Beth have been talking about, kind of use that as a starting point, run that through some type of protected AI, there could be a lot of value that comes out of that to support. But I think more on the cybersecurity component than I do AI as it relates to BCP. I think the impact of ransomware is really a BCP on its own. We've talked a lot about focusing on impact, not peril, but I think in this instance, I would kind of divert from that because I think ransomware and some of those scenarios are just very different, right? You have to involve a lot of third parties you may not deal with on a daily basis, which could be an attorney, which could be a forensic IT company, it could be your cyber insurer. And we've actually taken the step of getting all those people to the table and making sure that your insurance company, which is not us, we don't insure cyber, we can't help with that, but making sure that that insurance company knows who you're going to be using in these events, because sometimes time is of the essence. And we talked about daytime versus nighttime. A lot of these ransomware events actually take place on holidays and weekends, and they want you to be at your most vulnerable. They want you to feel frazzled. They want that rush of, you have to pay me before I unlock kind of your data or your systems or your network. So AI is all part of that. I think it's made some of those cyber attacks even easier, but there's also a lot of tools out there that leverage AI to help protect against that. So it's just important to stay up with the changing technology, whether AI or otherwise. But I think, at its simplest form, some of the GPTs and generative things can be helpful as you're working to pull this together. But I would caution you to rely on what it spits out, make it your own, make sure that you're spending that time with it. I would use it to get started, but not as a tool to kind of get you to where you want to be.
Great, thank you for that feedback. Because I think a lot of people are looking to GPT as the solution for anything that they need to work on at work these days. So I think that's a great point that it can definitely be a good starting point, but not the end all game. And we do actually have a session later on today regarding cybersecurity that I do recommend that you all attend later on this afternoon. I do have one more poll question. We are running a little bit short on time, but I would like to get that last poll question in if we could get that pulled up, just to get some feedback around what you all think is the biggest risk to continuity of services for residents. And obviously, some of these are going to vary based on your location throughout the country, but would be great to see
Beth, I
some
wonder if
of
I
your
could just
answers.
chime in on that last issue. Data privacy breaches. I think your privacy breach response plan and your data privacy practices, that really ought to be in a separate document, right? Because that's going to be super technical, and not everybody in the agency needs to know all of those details, but you still need to know the first few steps you're going to take if you have a data privacy breach. So that's a really detailed piece, critical in this day and age, as Troy said, but I would put that in a separate document.
Thank you. That's great feedback. Troy, if you could just speak just very briefly regarding just kind of how COVID impacted the business continuity plan.
Yeah, I think it was a big test. It's obviously a terrible event that happened, but one of the things that did come out of it was we were all tested in ways that you really couldn't foresee. And I think it really ties back to what we've talked about is if you focus on the impact, what were we without? We were without the ability to be together. But our networking, our buildings, a lot of those things were largely intact. So how did we respond to that? What lessons did we learn? What could we have done better? I'm a little surprised there's so many of you who don't have a BCP plan kind of more mature just from the lessons learned from that event that we all kind of lived through. No one could foresee that, but you could have foreseen the impact of what you were without. So the biggest takeaway, I think, is let's learn from what happened. Use your personal experiences. Again, you asked earlier about how to sell it to the executives. Well, if you didn't have a BCP plan then and COVID was a little bit chaotic and use that as an example to say, next time something like this happens or something other type of perils, we'd like to be better prepared. I think that could be a good selling point. So.
And Vince, from your perspective, I think you alluded to it earlier where you had kind of outsourced your kind of BCP support and had an offsite. If you could maybe just mention how that has kind of changed after COVID.
Certainly. So that service no longer needed to be had out there since we no longer needed a physical space. So COVID just changed the whole aspect of our plan from moving on to Zoom operations and Teams, that just changed everything from the standpoint of wrapping up, getting laptops to every employee in the agency now. IT ramping up control measures for all of our employees using things off site and tokens that you need to access certain things. With that said, like I mentioned earlier, has streamlined our operation now to the point that we have now positioned laptops at different locations around our agency. So if we need to do this again out of COVID, and some reason we all have to go back into our homes again, we can really access our laptops from various areas that we position both in the city and county to get them back and get everybody back into their home. We have ramped up operations in the finance department. We still do hard copy checks here, but now we've come up with they've worked a little bit quicker in regards to trying to bring that all online now, so we don't need physical checks to do that anymore and get back in the building. So all that has helped streamline our operation for sure. So from that standpoint, out of COVID, I think it's from the standpoint, it helps our operations move smoother and knowing our employees can still keep the business going if we're not at a physical location anymore.
But even in that
Thank you.
raises a lot of good questions, right? Who has access to the check printer? Where is it going
Right.
to go if it has to go
Right.
home? Who has access
Right.
to the check stock? It's
Right.
important to think through all those permutations because
Yeah. Yeah. And because of that, we've moved various items of the check stock around to different locations and safes around our property. So until we get that clear. So that was something that came out of COVID that we improved upon.
Thank you so much. Just want to go through the poll results, which is pretty amazing how evenly distributed all of these risks to the continuity of services for residents are so evenly distributed. So thank you all for answering that. And I think that kind of speaks to the question earlier of, can't we just give out a business continuity plan and have that apply to everyone? But obviously, you all are facing different struggles. So unfortunately, we wish we could, but we can't. But we do have the tool, as Melanie mentioned earlier, that can assist you all in developing that specific plan for your associated impacts. I do want to thank all the panelists today for your time, your wisdom, and all of your nuggets of knowledge that you have provided to our attendees. If we did not get to your question, either in the chat or the Q&A, we will try and get those completed out and sent out to you with all the supporting materials. I do highly recommend that you go to the Nonprofit Risk Management Center to sign up for the business continuity tool that HAI Group has provided. And if you do have any questions or need any assistance, you can reach out to myself. I can get you connected with Melanie on that one. Anything else that the panel would like to add?
I
I would like to add. Oh, who was that, Melanie?
after you, Vince.
Go ahead, Vince.
Yeah, no, I would like to, I'm just going to be honest, give a shout out to HI and the risk team there at HI. For those of you on the line, we're all members of HI Group. This is not your standard insurance company. This is a insurance collaborative that we have here, and you're the members. And we have services within HI that you don't get in a lot of other organizations, other insurance companies. So I encourage you to reach out to the staff at HI. They are phenomenal. Any area of this particular aspect of a business continuity plan that you get slowed on or have struggles with, they will definitely help you through that. And I can definitely attest to that. So please reach out to the staff there that we have at HI. They would definitely help you out.
Yeah, I just say that don't hide what you're doing to build resilience. When you build resilience, you increase confidence and you lessen fear. So make sure you're spreading the word about the good work that you're doing in this area.
And it's very easy for us to say this, right? But it's a lot harder for you to do it. But we're here to help. I think it is important, and it deserves someone at your organization's focus. So if that's your responsibility or not, I encourage you to be a leader in that area and kind of bring it forward to those to push some of these things forward. Because once one of those events do happen, you'll be thankful that you have it.
Amazing. Thank you all for your time. And I just want to remind everyone that we do have another session coming up at 1:30, and that is a post-event recovery and strategy session. So please join us for that one. Thank you all.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you. Thank you all.